Some places hold on to you long after you've let them go. For Morgan Reed, that place was a forgotten cabin high in the Montana mountains, where she'd learned to survive on grit and silence 30 years ago. The old logging road had deteriorated over the decades, washed out in places, overgrown in others. Her truck, a '98 Ford she'd kept running through sheer stubbornness, rattled over ruts that hadn't been there when she was young. Or maybe they had been, and she'd simply been too consumed with other concerns to notice. The late afternoon mist clung to the pines, turning the forest into a spectral landscape of shadows and whispers. Familiar, yet somehow more foreboding than she remembered. Morgan was 62 now, her hands weathered and strong, her face lined with the kind of creases that came from squinting into mountain sun and winter wind. Her hair, steel gray and pulled back in a practical braid, had once been the color of creek water under autumn leaves. She lived in the valley town of Pinecrest for the past 30 years, making her living as a hunting guide for tourists who wanted to feel wild for a weekend, teaching them to track elk, to read animal signs, to respect the mountains. Most of them never truly understood, but they paid well enough. The leather journal sat on the passenger seat beside her, its cover cracked and water-stained. She'd pulled it from her closet that morning, dusting off memories she'd worked hard to bury. The early entries were almost painful to read. The breathless excitement of a 32-year-old woman who'd fled a suffocating marriage in a city that had felt like a cage. She'd arrived in these mountains with nothing but determination and a romantic notion of self-sufficiency. That reality had quickly beaten out of her. Samuel Fletcher had saved her life that first winter. She'd written about him extensively in the journal, an old trapper who'd found her half-frozen in a snowbank, delirious with hypothermia and pride. He'd been 70 then, gruff and taciturn, but patient in his way. He taught her everything: how to set traps, how to read weather in the clouds, how to shoot straight and dress a kill. The cabin she'd lived in had belonged to him, a line shack from his younger days when he'd worked timber cruises. "You want to live up here, girl, you better learn quick." He told her that first morning, handing her a rifle that felt impossibly heavy. "Mountain don't care about your reasons. It'll kill you just as dead whether you're running from something or running to something." She'd learned. How she'd learned. The drive up to Pine Ridge had taken Morgan 3 hours, though she remembered a time when she could make it in half that. The storm clouds gathering over the mountains matched her mood, heavy with anticipation, dark with memories. Sheriff Logan Hayes had driven out yesterday to meet her at the property line. They'd known each other for 35 years, since before he'd worn a badge, back when he was just another young man trying to make sense of his place in the world. He'd been sweet on her once, she knew, though neither of them had ever spoken of it directly. "Legal all got sorted," he'd said, handing her the deed in a manila envelope that seemed too thin to contain something so significant. Nathan Fletcher's will was clear. "Everything goes to you. Property, personal effects, the whole parcel." The name had hit her like a stone to the chest. Nathan, Samuel's son, though calling him a son felt insufficient for the complicated relationship the two men had shared. Nathan had been 40 when Morgan first met him, a quiet man with his father's steady hands and a gentleness Samuel had never possessed. He'd helped her that first year, showing up at the cabin with supplies, teaching her the things Samuel was too impatient to explain properly. "When did he pass?" she'd asked Logan, her voice carefully neutral. "6 months back. Heart attack. Quick," the doctor said. "Probably didn't even know it was happening." Logan had shifted his weight uncomfortably. He never married Morgan. Lived alone in his daddy's old place down in the valley. Kept to himself mostly. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. 6 months. Nathan had been gone 6 months, and she hadn't known, hadn't felt it, hadn't sensed the world becoming emptier by one quiet, decent man. The road ended where it always had, becoming nothing more than a trail too narrow for vehicles. Morgan parked and sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, looking up at the pine-covered slope. The cabin was another mile up, hidden in a fold of the mountain where a spring-fed creek provided year-round water. She shouldered her pack and checked the pistol at her hip, a .357 she'd carried for decades. The weight was comforting. She wasn't expecting trouble, but the mountains had taught her that trouble often came unexpected. The hike up to the cabin was harder than she remembered. Her knees ached. Her breath came shorter than it used to. She'd kept herself in good shape, but 62 wasn't 32, no matter how much you wished otherwise. The trail was overgrown but still visible, and she found herself automatically reading the signs. Deer tracks, old bear scat from last season, the scratch marks on an aspen where something had marked its territory. As she crested the final rise, the cabin appeared, and for a moment Morgan couldn't breathe. It looked exactly as she'd left it, small, sturdy, built from local timber with a stone chimney that Samuel had laid himself. The roof had been repaired, she noticed, new shingles, probably within the last few years. The windows were intact, the door solid. Someone had been maintaining it. Nathan, of course. Nathan had been taking care of it all these years. The key Logan had given her turned smoothly in the lock, and the door swung open with barely a creak. The interior was dim, dust motes dancing in the shafts of late afternoon sunlight that cut through the windows. The smell hit her immediately. Pine, old wood, the faint, musty sweetness of a place left closed up. But underneath that, something else. Something lived in and cared for. The furniture was sparse, as it had always been. A table, two chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, a wood stove for heat and cooking. Her old trunk still sat at the foot of the bed, but in the center of the room, impossible to miss, sat two wooden crates. They were old packing crates, the kind used for shipping goods back when everything came by rail or wagon. Rough pine bound with rope that had grayed with age. On the top of each, burned into the wood with what looked like a branding iron, was a single word: Morgan. Her hands trembled as she approached them. The rope on the first crate was tied in a complex knot she recognized immediately. Samuel's knot, the one he'd used for everything from securing loads to hanging game. Nathan would have learned it from him. She didn't open them immediately. Instead, she moved through the cabin slowly, reacquainting herself with the space. Someone had swept recently. The floor was clean. The wood stove had been freshly blacked. In the small pantry, she found canned goods neatly stacked and dated. The most recent was from last fall. The bed was made with a blanket she didn't recognize, a quilt that looked hand-stitched. She touched it gently, recognizing the pattern. A traditional log cabin design, each square carefully pieced. Had Nathan made this? She couldn't imagine him sitting with needle and thread. But then she'd stopped knowing what Nathan was capable of 30 years ago. On the small shelf above the table, she found a row of books, field guides to mountain plants and animals, some old paperback westerns with cracked spines, and a thick, leather-bound volume that made her breath catch. It was Samuel's journal. She recognized it immediately. She'd seen him writing in it countless times, usually by firelight after a long day, his handwriting cramped and difficult to read. Beside it sat another journal, newer, its leather still supple. She opened it to the first page and saw Nathan's handwriting, neat and careful where his father's had been almost illegible. Year 1 property maintenance log, it read. Roof inspection, south side needs patching. Creek running clear, no signs of intrusion. Morgan's things stored and protected. She paged forward, finding entry after entry, year after year. 30 years of notes about the cabin, the property, the changing seasons. Nathan documenting everything, maintaining everything, waiting, always waiting for her. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the floor. Morgan lit one of the oil lamps and finally had approached the first crate. Her pocket knife made quick work of the rope, and the lid lifted easily, as if it had been opened and closed many times. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, were letters, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, bundled with twine and organized by year. She lifted the first bundle, dated from 31 years ago, just after she'd left. Beneath the letters were photographs, their edges yellowed, but the images still clear. She saw herself, younger, leaner, her face fierce with concentration as she sighted down a rifle. Samuel stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, something almost like pride in his weathered face. And Nathan, slightly out of focus, watching them both with an expression she couldn't quite read. There were more photographs, hunting trips, winter scenes, the cabin in various seasons. A life she'd lived and then abandoned, preserved here in black and white. At the bottom of the crate, wrapped separately, was her old leather jacket. She lifted it out, held it to her face, and breathed in the scent of wood smoke and gun oil in memory. It still fit, she discovered, slipping it on. Maybe a little tighter across the shoulders, but it fit. The second crate waited, patient and mysterious. But it was getting dark, and Morgan found she couldn't face whatever was in there just yet. She needed to process what she'd already found. The letters, the photographs, the evidence of Nathan's 30 years of faithful stewardship. She built a fire in the wood stove, using kindling from the neat stack beside it, and put coffee on to boil. The familiar ritual was soothing, her hands remembering the motions even after all these years. She settled at the table with the first bundle of letters and began to read. Dear Morgan, the first one started in Nathan's careful script. I hope this finds you well, wherever you are. The cabin is secure. I've winterized the windows and stocked the pantry. Your things are safe. I think about you often and hope you found what you were looking for. It was signed simply, N. She read through the night, letter after letter, watching Nathan's life unfold in careful, measured words. He wrote about the seasons changing, about maintaining the property, about his father's declining health and eventual death. He wrote about the valley, about people she'd known, about the slow changes that came to the mountains over decades. And threaded through it all, subtle but unmistakable, was his enduring affection for her. He never said it directly. That wasn't Nathan's way. But it was there in every careful line, every observation about something he thought she would have appreciated, every mention of keeping her things safe. By dawn, she'd read only a fraction of the letters, but she understood. Nathan had spent 30 years keeping faith with a woman who'd left without saying goodbye. He'd preserved everything she'd abandoned, maintained the life she'd walked away from, and waited. Always waited for her to return. The second crate held more secrets, she knew, but those could wait for daylight. Morgan stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the ridge, her reflection ghostly in the glass. She looked older, more worn, but also more solid somehow. The mountains had a way of stripping away the unnecessary, leaving only what was essential. I'm back, Nathan, she whispered to the empty room. I don't know why, but I'm back. Outside, a raven called, harsh and knowing. The mountain was waking up, and so was she. The second crate called to her all through the morning. Morgan tried to ignore it, busying herself with mundane tasks, sweeping the floor again, though it didn't need it, checking the window frames, organizing the pantry. But her eyes kept drifting back to that rough pine box with her name burned into the lid. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith and flooded the cabin with pale winter light, she could put it off no longer. She approached the crate the way she might approach a wounded animal, carefully, ready for anything. The rope came away easily, and the lid lifted with a soft creak. Inside, wrapped in canvas treated with wax to keep out moisture, were Samuel's personal effects. She recognized his hunting knife first, the blade still oiled and sharp, the antler handle worn smooth from decades of use, his compass, tarnished but functional, the brass case engraved with initials she'd never been able to decipher, a tobacco pouch, long empty, but still fragrant with the sweet smell of his preferred blend. Beneath these items lay Samuel's field journal, different from the maintenance log she'd found on the shelf. This one was older, the leather cracked and stained, filled with his almost illegible handwriting. She opened it carefully, mindful of the brittle pages. The entries were sporadic, sometimes months apart. Samuel had never been one for daily documentation. But what was there painted a picture of a man more observant and thoughtful than she'd given him credit for. He wrote about animal migrations, weather patterns, the slow change of the forest over seasons. And occasionally, briefly, he wrote about her. Girls got sand. Read one entry from her first winter. Didn't think she'd last, but she's tougher than she looks. Reminds me of Helen before the mountains took her. Morgan had never known Samuel had a wife. He'd never mentioned her, never spoke of a past before the mountains. She read on, hungry now for these glimpses into the old man's history. The entries from his final year were different, more urgent, less reflective. He wrote about finding survey stakes on his property, about strangers asking questions in town, about a growing conviction that someone was trying to force him out. They think I'm just an old fool, one entry read, but I know what's under this ground, had it essayed 20 years back. Kept quiet about it. Rare earth minerals, the geologist said, worth a fortune if you could get at them. I never wanted the money, just wanted to be left alone. But now they know. Someone's been looking at old records, asking the wrong questions. Morgan's hands tightened on the journal. She remembered that last winter before Samuel died, how paranoid he'd seemed, how he'd startled at unexpected sounds. She'd attributed it to age, to the natural decline of an old man's mind. But what if he'd been right? The final entry, dated just a week before his death, made her blood run cold. Told the boy, he'll know what to do. Can't trust anyone else. If something happens to me, Nathan will keep it safe, keep her safe. The girl doesn't know, better that way. They can't hurt what they can't find. Beneath the journal lay a stack of papers wrapped in another layer of wax canvas. Morgan unfolded them carefully, her heart hammering against her ribs. Land surveys, mineral assay reports, legal documents dense with technical language she struggled to parse. The assay report was dated 32 years ago, signed by a geologist named Dr. Raymond Porter. It detailed significant deposits of rare earth elements: neodymium, dysprosium, praseodymium, concentrated in a specific area of Samuel's property. Even with her limited understanding of such things, she could tell from the numbers that this was valuable, very valuable. But there was more. At the bottom of the stack, she found a series of photographs that made her breath catch. They showed Samuel at the base of a cliff, the same cliff where she'd found his body that terrible winter morning. But in these photos, he was alive, and he wasn't alone. Another man stood with him, younger, wearing a surveyor's vest. They appeared to be arguing, Samuel's face set in anger, the other man's body language aggressive. The photos were dated just 2 days before Samuel's death. Tucked between the photographs was a letter addressed to her in Nathan's handwriting. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. Dear Morgan, if you're reading this, then I've passed on, and you've come back to the cabin as I always believed you would. I've spent 30 years protecting what my father left and trying to understand what really happened to him. I don't think Dad fell. I think he was pushed. The man in those photographs is Victor Caldwell. He was a claim jumper, a man who made his living stealing other people's mineral rights through legal manipulation. And when that didn't work, through intimidation. Dad had evidence. Victor forged documents, tried to file claims on our property. When Dad threatened to go to the authorities, Victor got desperate. I couldn't prove it. Dad's death was ruled accidental, an old man who slipped on icy rocks. But I've kept looking, kept gathering evidence. I've filed legal challenges, tried to protect the property rights. Victor's been fighting me every step, using shell companies and lawyers. He knows what's under this ground, and he's spent decades trying to get it. I'm sorry I never reached out to you directly. Part of me wanted to protect you from this mess. Part of me knew you'd left for good reasons and didn't want to be dragged back. But mostly I think I was afraid. Afraid you'd forgotten us, forgotten this place. Afraid that the woman I remembered had moved on to something better. The second bundle in this crate contains everything I've gathered, every document, every piece of evidence. I don't know if it's enough to prove what Victor did, but maybe you'll find something I missed. You always saw things others didn't. I've also included something personal, something Dad meant for you to have. The compass, it was his father's, brought over from the old country. The coordinates engraved on the back aren't random. They point to a place on the property where Dad hid his original deed and claimed documents. He didn't trust banks, didn't trust lawyers, but he trusted the mountain. I hope you've found peace wherever you are. I hope you've built a good life. But if any part of you still belongs to these mountains, if any part of you remembers what we had here, then maybe you'll see this through. Finish what Dad and I couldn't. Yours always, Nathan Morgan read the letter 3 times, each word sinking deeper into her chest like stones into water. Samuel murdered. Nathan spending 30 years fighting a battle she'd known nothing about. And she'd been down in Pinecrest, guiding city people on hunting trips, living a half-life while the men who'd saved her, who'd taught her, who'd loved her in their quiet ways, fought alone. She looked at the compass alt again, really looked at it. The coordinates on the back were worn, but still legible. She committed them to memory. She'd always been good with numbers, could hold a map in her head for days. The photographs of Samuel and Victor Caldwell stared up at her from the table. She studied Victor's face, hard, calculating. The face of a man who saw the world as something to be exploited. He'd be older now if he was still alive. Probably thought he'd won. Thought the evidence was buried with Samuel and then Nathan. He didn't know about her. Didn't know that the quiet mountain woman who disappeared 30 years ago had come back. Didn't know that Samuel had taught her not just to hunt animals, but to track, to wait, to strike when the moment was right. She gathered the letters, the documents, the photographs, and packed them carefully in her rucksack. The compass she hung around her neck on a leather cord. Samuel's knife she slipped into the sheath at her belt next to her pistol. She was armed now, not just with weapons, but with knowledge. And knowledge, Samuel had always said, was the deadliest weapon of all. Outside, clouds were building over the ridge, promising snow. Morgan stood on the cabin's small porch, looking out at the forest she'd once called home. The weight of Nathan's letter pressed against her heart like an accusation and a benediction both. She'd left this place to escape her past, to build something new. But some debts could never be outrun, some obligations never fully abandoned. Samuel and Nathan had protected her, had kept faith when she'd given them nothing in return but silence and absence. Now it was her turn. She would find out what really happened on that cliff 30 years ago. She would make Victor Caldwell answer for what he'd done, and she would finish what Samuel and Nathan had started, even if it cost her everything. The mountain wind picked up, carrying the promise of winter. Morgan breathed it in, feeling something old and fierce wake up inside her. She'd been a guide for tourists too long, playing at being the person she used to be. But that woman, the one who'd learned to survive with nothing but will and a rifle, she was still there, buried under years of comfortable living. Time to wake her up. Time to remember who she really was. A sound in the distance caught her attention, the rumble of a vehicle on the old logging road. Not her truck. She would have recognized that engine anywhere. Someone else was coming up the mountain. Friend or foe, she couldn't know, but after what she'd just learned, caution seemed wise. Morgan moved quickly, gathering what she needed. Binoculars, extra ammunition, a canteen of water. Years of guiding had taught her to pack efficiently, to anticipate needs before they arose. She secured the cabin, tucking the most important documents inside her jacket, close to her heart. The rest she cached in a hollow log 50 yards behind the cabin. Samuel had shown her the hiding spot that first year, a place to store emergency supplies. The coordinates on the compass would have to wait. First, she needed to know who was coming and why. She took a position on the ridge above the cabin, concealed among granite boulders that provided both cover and a clear view of the approach. Through the binoculars, she watched a battered green Jeep negotiate the rutted road, its progress slow but determined. When it reached the place where vehicles could go no further, it stopped, and a man climbed out. Walter Jenkins. Relief washed through her. She'd known Walter for decades. He ran the general store in Pinecrest, had been there since before Morgan first arrived. He'd extended her credit that first hard winter, never mentioned it again after she'd paid him back. If anyone in these mountains could be trusted, it was Walter. But she didn't rush down to greet him. Samuel's training ran too deep for that. She watched as Walter removed 2 canvas bags from the Jeep, then looked around, scanning the trees as if searching for something. Or someone. Was he alone? She waited, watching, until she was certain he'd come by himself. Only then did she make her way down to the cabin, timing her arrival to coincide with his. No sense letting him know she'd been watching from the ridge. Saw smoke from the chimney. Walter said when she opened the door, figured you might need supplies. He carried 2 canvas bags, which he set on the table without ceremony. Fresh bread, coffee, canned goods, matches, a bottle of whiskey. Practical things chosen by someone who understood mountain living. Thank you, Walter. You didn't have to come all the way up here. Didn't have to. Wanted to. He looked around the cabin, his gaze landing on the open crates, the scattered letters. His eyes were sharp despite his 75 years, missing nothing. Heard you inherited the place. Heard about Nathan, too. Sorry for your loss. I didn't even know he was gone until yesterday. Walter nodded slowly. He kept to himself these last years. Good man, though. Quiet, but good. Used to come into the store regular, always asking if I'd heard from you. He paused, measuring his words. He never stopped hoping you'd come back. The weight of that settled on her shoulders like snow. I should have at least written. Can't change the past. Can only work with what we've got now. Walter's eyes moved to the documents spread across the table. You finding anything interesting in all that? Morgan hesitated, then decided trust had to start somewhere. She showed him Nathan's letters, the photographs of Victor Caldwell, the survey reports. Walter studied them carefully, his expression growing darker. Victor Caldwell, now that's a name I haven't heard in a while. Thought maybe he died or moved on. You know him? Everyone around here knows of him. Not many know him personally. He doesn't live in these parts anymore, but his reputation lingers. Back in the 70s and 80s, he worked every angle there was, claim jumping, forged documents, suspicious accidents. Nothing ever stuck to him legally, but people knew. And now he's respectable. Walter's tone made it clear what he thought of that respectability. Runs his operations through some development company, Caldwell Land, something like that. Been buying up mountain properties, turning them into vacation resorts or mineral leases. Makes a fortune and stays clean because he's got lawyers doing the dirty work. Morgan felt her jaw tighten. He's still operating, more than ever. Got big plans for this whole region, from what I hear. Wants to buy up all the old homesteads, consolidate the parcels. Walter looked at her steadily. Your property would be right in the middle of that. She showed him the map with Nathan's notations. He's been coming onto the land for years, looking for the mineral deposits. Doesn't surprise me. Victor never could let go of something he wanted. Patient, though, I'll give him that. Some men would have given up after 3 decades. Not Victor. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 30 years of predatory patience pressing down on them. Finally, Walter spoke again. You planning to fight him? I'm planning to find out what really happened to Samuel. And if Victor had anything to do with it, then yes, I'm going to fight him. Walter studied her face, seeing something there that made him nod. You'll need help. Victor's got resources, got connections, but he doesn't know these mountains like we do. Doesn't have roots here like we do. We? You think you're the only one who owes Samuel Fletcher? That old man helped half the people in this valley at one time or another. Never asked for anything back. Never kept score. People remember that. Walter stood gathering his coat. I'll ask around quietly. See what I can find out about Victor's current operations. Who he's got working for him. Walter, be careful. If Nathan was right about what Victor did, I didn't survive 75 years by being reckless. But I didn't survive by backing down either. He paused at the door. Samuel would be proud of you, coming back like this. Nathan, too. They both loved you, you know, in their way. After he left, Morgan returned to the letters. She read through the afternoon, piecing together the full picture of Nathan's investigation. He'd been meticulous, patient, gathering evidence bit by bit, but he'd also been alone, fighting a battle he knew he might never win. She wouldn't make that mistake. Walter was right. She needed allies, needed people who understood what was at stake. But first, she needed to understand the full extent of what Samuel had hidden. The compass coordinates called to her, promising answers buried in the mountain itself. But daylight was fading, and trekking through these woods at night would be foolish. Tomorrow she would follow them. Tonight she would prepare. The mountains had taught her many things, but perhaps the most important was this. Patience and preparation won more battles than speed and fury. She cleaned Samuel's rifle, checked her own pistol, sharpened both knives. She studied the map until she had every detail memorized, planned her route to the coordinates. And as she worked, she felt the mountain woman she'd been waking up fully, shaking off 30 years of comfortable sleep. Victor Caldwell had waited 3 decades. He could wait a little longer while she got ready to finish this. Morgan woke before dawn, her body remembering the rhythm of mountain mornings. The air in the cabin was cold enough to see her breath, but the wood stove had kept a low heat through the night. She dressed quickly. Thermal underwear, wool pants, flannel shirt, her old leather jacket. The weight of it felt right, like putting on armor. A soft knocking at the door stopped her cold. Who would be here at this hour? Walter would have called out. Victor's men wouldn't knock. She reached for the rifle, approached the door cautiously. Who's there? A young voice answered. Miss Reed? It's me, Lily Carson. My mom runs the coffee shop in town. Morgan opened the door to find a girl of perhaps 12 standing on her porch, bundled against the cold, a thermos clutched in her mittened hands. Her cheeks were pink from the hike, her eyes bright with excitement and curiosity. "How did you get up here?" "Followed Mr. Jenkins yesterday." Lily didn't seem at all concerned about trekking alone through mountain wilderness. "I know these woods. Dad takes me hunting." Morgan couldn't help but see herself at that age, stubborn, fearless, certain of her place in the world. "What do you want?" "I brought you coffee. Mom said you'd be up early, and—" The girl hesitated. "And I thought maybe you'd want company? Mr. Fletcher used to tell me stories about you, about how you learned to track and hunt. Said you were the best he ever saw." Nathan had talked about her? To this child? The thought was both warming and unsettling. "Does your mother know you're here?" Lily nodded. "She said as long as I'm back by noon, it's okay. She knows I can take care of myself." Morgan considered sending the girl away. She had work to do, dangerous work. But something in Lily's expression, that mix of determination and hope, reminded her too much of herself. "You can stay until I finish breakfast. Then you need to head back down. I've got things to do today." Lily's face fell, but she nodded. "Can I at least see the cabin first? Mr. Fletcher said it was special." Against her better judgment, Morgan let the girl in. Lily moved through the space with reverence, touching things gently, asking questions about everything: the wood stove, the books, the photographs. Her curiosity was relentless but not invasive. She seemed to genuinely care about the history of this place, these people. "Mr. Fletcher said you saved his life once." "That true?" Morgan nearly choked on her coffee. "I don't know what he told you, but if anything, it was the other way around. Samuel saved my life. Taught me everything I know about surviving up here." "No, not Mr. Samuel, Mr. Nathan. He said you pulled him out of Crow Creek when he got caught in the spring runoff. Said he'd have drowned for sure if not for you." The memory surfaced unexpectedly. Nathan, younger, his face pale with cold, coughing up creek water as she dragged him to shore. She hadn't thought about that day in decades. That was a long time ago. He never forgot it, though. Lily's voice was matter of fact. "He talked about you a lot. Always said you'd come back someday, when the time was right." Morgan felt something catch in her throat. "When did you know Nathan?" "He used to come to the coffee shop every Tuesday, sat in the corner booth, drank black coffee, read his newspaper. Sometimes he'd tell me stories while Mom was busy with customers." Lily looked around the cabin again. He was right about this place. It does feel special. Morgan finished her breakfast in silence, watching the girl explore. There was something about Lily that reminded her not just of herself, but of Nathan. That quiet attentiveness, that way of seeing beneath the surface of things. When they stepped outside, the morning had fully arrived. Clear, cold, promising. The kind of day that made the mountains seem sharper, more present. "I should get going," Morgan said, checking her pack one last time. "And you should head back to town." But Lily's attention was elsewhere, looking at something on the ground near the tree line. "Miss Reed, there's something weird here." Morgan followed the girl's gaze. There, half hidden in the fallen pine needles, was a survey stake, bright orange plastic recently placed. On its side was a logo, CLD, with a mountain peak symbol, Caldwell Land Development. Morgan crouched, examining the stake. It hadn't been there yesterday, she was certain of it, which meant someone had been on the property overnight, moving quietly enough that she hadn't heard them. The thought sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the morning cold. "What is it?" Lily asked, kneeling beside her, trouble. Morgan pulled the stake from the ground. "Someone's been trespassing." She looked around, her eyes scanning the tree line, the ridge above. Were there more stakes? Was someone watching even now? The forest suddenly felt less welcoming, more threatening. Lily's voice broke through her thoughts. "There's another one. Over there." Sure enough, 50 yards away stood another orange stake, its bright plastic gleaming against the browns and greens of the forest floor. And beyond that, Morgan could just make out a third. "These people," Lily said, her young face serious. "They're the ones Mr. Nathan was worried about, aren't they?" Morgan looked at the girl, surprised. "What do you know about that?" "Just what I overheard. He'd talk to my mom sometimes when he thought I wasn't listening, about a man named Caldwell who wanted his land. about how he was afraid something might happen to him like it happened to his dad. Morgan made a decision then, one she hoped she wouldn't regret. Lily, I need your help, but it might be dangerous and your mother would kill me if anything happened to you. The girl's eyes lit up. What kind of help? I need to know where all these stakes are. How many? What pattern they're making? But I also need to follow these coordinates. She showed Lily the compass. Think you can find the stakes while I'm gone? Mark them on this map? Lily took the map reverently, her face solemn with responsibility. I can do that. Dad taught me how to use a compass, how to mark positions. Be careful. Don't let anyone see you. If you hear or see anyone, you hide. Understand? Lily nodded, clutching the map to her chest. I promise. Morgan watched her go, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But the girl moved through the forest with surprising stealth for her age. And Morgan had the sense she knew these woods better than most adults. With Lily tracking the survey stakes, Morgan was free to follow the coordinates on Samuel's compass. They led northeast, up a steep incline toward a ridge she remembered well. She and Samuel had hunted elk there once, in a meadow that caught the morning sun just right. The climb was rigorous, the kind that tested endurance and rewarded effort with views that made your heart ache. Despite her age, Morgan moved steadily, her body finding its old rhythm. The forest opened occasionally, giving glimpses of the valley below, the cabin a tiny dot in the distance. After an hour of hiking, the compass led her to a massive old pine, its trunk easily 6 feet across, marked with 3 deep cuts in the bark. Samuel's mark. She remembered him explaining it once. Old trapper sign means something important buried here. The ground beneath the tree was rocky, covered with pine needles and forest debris. She cleared it away carefully, using a stick to probe the soil. About 2 feet down, her stick hit something solid. She dug with her hands, uncovering a metal box roughly the size of a tackle box. It was rusted but intact, sealed with a heavy padlock. She tried Samuel's knife in the lock, working it carefully until something clicked and the lock fell away. Inside the box, wrapped in multiple layers of oiled canvas, were documents. The original deed to the property, dating back over 100 years, showing the Fletcher family's claim. Mineral rights documentation, properly filed and notarized. And most importantly, a legal brief prepared by a lawyer named Harrison Webb, dated just weeks before Samuel's death. Morgan read it carefully, her legal knowledge limited but sufficient to understand the basics. Webb had been building a case against Victor Caldwell, documenting his pattern of fraud and intimidation. The brief outlined multiple instances where Victor had used forged documents to claim mineral rights on properties he didn't own. At the bottom of the brief was a note in Samuel's handwriting. Meeting with sheriff tomorrow. Finally got enough to put Victor away. This ends. But Samuel had never made it to that meeting. He died the night before and the evidence had died with him. Or so Victor must have thought. Morgan sat back on her heels, pieces falling into place. Victor had known about the meeting, had known Samuel was finally going to bring charges, so he'd acted first, eliminating the threat in a way that looked like an accident. It was all speculation, impossible to prove after 30 years. But combined with Nathan's evidence, with the pattern of Victor's behavior, it painted a clear picture. Clear enough maybe to make something happen. She repacked the box carefully and began the hike back down. The sun was past its peak, shadows lengthening across the valley. She needed to get back to the cabin, needed to study these documents properly, needed to figure out her next move. But she knew one thing with certainty. Victor Caldwell would come. She'd thrown down the challenge by returning to the cabin by claiming her inheritance. He would come to deal with her, just as he'd dealt with Samuel. The difference was, she'd be ready. She'd spent 3 decades learning to track, to wait, to read terrain and anticipate movement. Victor thought he was hunting her, but he was wrong. The hunter had come home, and she knew these mountains better than he ever would. As Morgan approached the cabin, she saw Lily sitting on the porch steps waiting. The girl jumped up when she spotted her, waving excitedly. I found them. All the stakes. Mark them, just like you said. Morgan joined her on the porch, impressed despite herself. How many? 17. They make a grid, see? Lily spread out the map, pointing to the X's she'd carefully marked. They're all in this area, about half a mile wide, quarter mile deep. Morgan studied the pattern, recognition dawning. The stakes corresponded almost exactly to the area where Samuel's assay report had shown the highest concentration of rare earth minerals. They knew. They knew exactly where to look. Lily, this is important. Did you see anyone while you were out there? Hear anything? The girl shook her head. No people. But, she hesitated. There was something weird. Down by the creek where the stakes stop, it looked like someone had been digging. Recently, the dirt was still dark, not dried out yet. Show me. They moved quickly through the forest, Lily leading with the confidence of someone who'd marked every step. The spot was just as she'd described, an area about 6 feet square where the topsoil had been removed, then replaced. Not a large excavation, more like a test pit. Someone was taking samples, confirming what they already suspected, which meant they were moving forward with their plans, whatever those might be. A twig snapped somewhere behind them. Morgan spun, pushing Lily behind her, hand going to the pistol at her hip. But it wasn't Victor or his men. It was a young deer, startled by their presence, bounding away through the underbrush. We need to get back to the cabin, Morgan said, not relaxing her vigilance. It's not safe out here. They're coming for the land, aren't they? Lily asked as they walked. These Caldwell people. Yes. What are you going to do? Morgan considered her answer carefully. The easiest thing would be to sell, take the money, walk away, let Victor have his victory, 30 years delayed. But that would mean Samuel died for nothing. Nathan spent his life fighting for nothing. The mountain would be scarred, the forest clear-cut, the minerals ripped from the earth with no regard for what was destroyed in the process. I'm going to fight, she said finally. I'm going to finish what Samuel and Nathan started. Lily's face lit up with fierce approval. Good. Mr. Nathan would have wanted that. Back at the cabin, Morgan checked the time. It was later than she'd thought. Lily should have been home hours ago. Your mother will be worried. I called her from Mr. Jenkins' store before I came up. Told her I might be late. She said it was okay as long as I was with you. Lily looked around the cabin, her expression suddenly uncertain. Can I come back tomorrow? Help some more? Morgan wanted to say no, wanted to keep the girl safe, away from whatever was coming. But she recognized the look in Lily's eyes. That hunger for purpose, for meaning beyond the confines of a small-town life. It was the same hunger that had driven her to these mountains 30 years ago. We'll see. For now, you need to get home before dark. You know the way? Lily nodded, already gathering her things. I know the way. And Lily? Thank you. For the map, for finding the stakes, for caring about Nathan. The girl smiled, a flash of something old and wise in her young face. He was my friend. I miss him. After Lily left, Morgan spread the new documents across the table, comparing them with what she'd found in Nathan's crate. The picture they painted was damning. Victor Caldwell had spent decades trying to get his hands on this land, using every trick legal and otherwise. And when Samuel had finally gathered enough evidence to expose him, Victor had killed him. She couldn't prove that. Not yet. But she had enough to start asking questions, to make Victor uncomfortable, to let him know she wasn't going to disappear quietly. The sound of vehicles on the logging road snapped her out of her thoughts. Multiple vehicles, by the sound of it, moving with purpose. Morgan moved to the window, watching as a convoy appeared. A glossy black SUV leading, followed by 2 white pickup trucks with the CLD logo on their doors. They were here, sooner than she'd expected, but not unprepared for. She checked her weapons, positioned herself where she could see the approach, but remained partially hidden. She had no illusions about what kind of men these might be. The vehicles parked in a semicircle around the cabin, blocking any easy escape route. From the lead SUV emerged 4 men, 3 young, fit, dressed in identical khaki field clothes. The 4th was older, tall and lean, with the confident bearing of someone used to giving orders. He wore an expensive hunting jacket and carried a clipboard, not a weapon, but Morgan wasn't fooled. The dangerous ones never looked dangerous at first glance. She watched as they conferred briefly, then approached the cabin. The older man in the lead, the others flanking him like an honor guard, or security detail. This was it, the first real confrontation. Morgan felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same feeling she'd had tracking elk through silent forests, waiting for the perfect shot. She wasn't afraid. She was focused, present, alive in a way she hadn't been in years. Let them come. She was ready. The four men approached the cabin with the easy confidence of those unaccustomed to resistance. Morgan watched through the window, noting their positions, their movements, the way they scanned the property. The older man in the expensive hunting jacket stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, signaling the others to hang back. His face held the weathered authority of someone who expected the world to bend to his will. Knock at the door. You must be Morgan Reed. A cool professional smile that never reached his eyes. Jason Harmon, Chief Land Surveyor for Caldwell Land Development. We're conducting preliminary assessments of parcels in this area. Morgan kept her hand near her hip, the pistol a reassuring presence beneath her jacket. I didn't authorize any assessments. Those stakes your people planted are on private property. The man's smile tightened a fraction. There seems to be some confusion. We have documentation indicating this land is part of a municipal resource survey. Perhaps you haven't been informed of the county ordinances regarding— Save it. Morgan cut him off. I've got the deed right here, clear as day. No easements, no survey rights, no municipal claims. This land belongs to me. The stakes come out and you leave. Now. The three younger men shifted their positions slightly, spreading out in a way that raised the hairs on Morgan's neck. Not casual surveyors, these men. They moved like security personnel, alert and coordinated. Ms. Reed, we're simply doing our job. Harmon's voice remained pleasant, but his eyes had hardened. I'm sure we can come to an accommodation that satisfies everyone. Mr. Caldwell is quite generous with landowners who cooperate with his development plans. Is he now? And what did he offer Nathan Fletcher? Before he died of a convenient heart attack? Harmon's smile vanished completely. I don't know what you're implying, but I suggest you consider your situation carefully. This is an isolated location. County services are limited up here. Are you threatening me, Mr. Harmon? Merely stating facts. The law moves slowly in these mountains. So do bodies when they fall from cliffs. Morgan let the words hang in the air between them, a challenge and a revelation both. Something shifted in Harmon's eyes. Surprise, quickly masked, a momentary calculation. Then, perhaps Mr. Caldwell should speak with you directly. He's very interested in this property. I bet he is. Tell him I'm not selling. Not now, not ever. And tell him I know about Samuel Fletcher. The men withdrew with reluctant efficiency, their vehicles kicking up dust as they departed. Morgan watched until they disappeared around the bend, then exhaled slowly. First blood drawn, she'd let them know she wasn't ignorant or afraid. But in doing so, she'd also revealed her hand. Victor would know now that she had suspicions, maybe evidence. The next move would be his. She spent the afternoon systematically removing every survey stake Lily had marked on the map, piling them beside the cabin like trophies of war. A message to Victor, should his men return. This land would not be taken easily. As dusk settled over the mountains, Logan's patrol SUV appeared on the logging road. He arrived alone, his expression grim as he climbed out. Heard you had visitors. News travels fast in these parts. Logan ascended the porch steps, his knees creaking audibly. Caldwell's men making themselves known already. That's not their usual play. Morgan led him inside, showed him the stakes she'd collected. They're getting bold. 17 stakes, and someone dug test pits by the creek. Logan studied the orange markers, rubbing one between his fingers. Not just bold, desperate. They don't usually move this fast unless there's pressure from above. Morgan laid out the documents she'd found. Samuel's original mineral rights, the assay reports, the photographs of Samuel arguing with Victor days before his death. Logan examined each piece carefully, his cop's eye missing nothing. I was just a deputy back then. 28 years old, barely more than a rookie. Logan's weathered face clouded with old regrets. I knew something wasn't right about Samuel's death. The angle of the fall, the way the ground was disturbed. I tried telling my boss, but Sheriff Malden, he shut you down, hard and fast. Said I was seeing ghosts, told me to stick to routine patrols and leave the detective work to the big boys. Logan's fist clenched. A week later, I saw Malden driving a brand new truck. Nothing I could prove, but the implication hung in the air. Corruption had deep roots in these mountains. You think Malden was in Victor's pocket? Logan nodded slowly, him and half the county commission back then. Victor was buying influence, building his little empire piece by piece. I kept notes, my own private investigation, but without official backing, there wasn't much I could do. Morgan pulled out Nathan's letters, showing Logan the years of careful documentation. Nathan knew. He spent 30 years gathering evidence, fighting legal battles, trying to protect this land. If we combine what he found with what you have, it still might not be enough. 30 years is a long time. Witnesses die, memories fade, evidence disappears. And Victor is more powerful now than ever. Got friends in the state capitol, connections in Washington. Morgan studied Logan's face, seeing the conflict there. The lawman who wanted justice warring with the realist who understood limitations. You think we should give up? After what he did to Samuel? To Nathan? I didn't say that. Logan met her gaze steadily. I'm just saying we need to be smart. Victor's careful, always keeps his hands clean, uses others to do his dirty work. If we're going to nail him, we need something he can't wiggle out of. Something current, like catching him in the act. The old lawman smiled grimly. Now you're thinking like a cop. They spent the next hour planning, comparing notes, identifying weak points in Victor's operation. Logan's decades as sheriff had given him insights into how a man like Victor operated, the patterns of corruption and intimidation he employed. There's someone else you should talk to. Logan tapped a finger on one of Nathan's notes. Eleanor Dixon. She was Victor's bookkeeper back in the day, handled all his accounts, saw the money moving in and out. Nathan tried to get her to talk, but she was too scared. Now, though, she's still alive? Nursing home in Pinecrest, 84 years old and dying of cancer, from what I hear. Might be more willing to talk with nothing left to lose. As Logan prepared to leave, a sharp crack echoed from the forest. A broken branch, too heavy to be wildlife. Both of them froze, instinctively reaching for weapons. Someone's watching, Morgan whispered, moving away from the window into the shadows. Logan nodded, his hand on his service weapon. Probably been there since I arrived. Want me to check it out? No, let them watch. Let them wonder what we're planning. After Logan departed, darkness settled over the cabin. Morgan moved through the space with purpose, checking windows, securing doors, positioning herself where she could observe without being observed. The mountains at night held a different kind of silence, pregnant with possibility, with danger. Sleep came in fitful bursts, her senses attuned to every sound, the hoot of an owl, the rustling of pine needles in the wind, the distant howl of coyotes. Samuel had taught her to sleep with one ear open, to let her subconscious filter the normal sounds of the forest from those that signaled threat. She woke at dawn, refreshed despite the interrupted sleep, and found Walter waiting on her porch. The old storekeeper held a thermos of coffee and a worried expression. Heard about your visitors yesterday. Morgan, you need to be careful. Victor's not above in making problems disappear permanently. Morgan accepted the coffee gratefully. Samuel disappeared. Nathan, too. I'm not going to be the third. Walter lowered his voice, though no one else was around to hear. I've been asking questions, like I promised. Got some information that might help. Victor's son, Garrett, is running the operation now, day-to-day stuff. He's the one pushing hardest for this development. Wants to build some kind of exclusive resort up here. Combine it with mineral extraction. A resort? In these mountains? For the ultra-wealthy. Private cabins, helicopter access, the works. The mineral rights are just a bonus. The real money's in selling mountain serenity to billionaires tired of their private islands. Morgan snorted derisively. Not much serenity once the mining equipment moves in. That's the clever part. Walter's eyes narrowed. They start with the resort. All environmentally friendly, minimal footprint. Get the permits, start construction. Only then do they begin the limited resource extraction, carefully hidden from the resort guests. By the time anyone realizes what's really happening, it'll be too late. The mountain will be hollowed out from within. The scale of the plan staggered Morgan. Not just her land, but the entire mountain range was at risk. Where did you hear all this? Walter tapped the side of his nose. 30 years running the only general store in 50 miles, you hear things. People talk when they're stocking up on supplies. Especially the surveyors and geologists. They're not from around here, don't know who they can trust. The old storekeeper paused, choosing his next words carefully. There's something else. Victor's in financial trouble. Overextended himself on some development in Arizona that went belly up. This project isn't just another moneymaker for him. It's a lifeline. Without it, his whole empire might collapse. That explains the urgency. Morgan felt a surge of grim satisfaction. If Victor was desperate, he might make mistakes. And mistakes left evidence. Walter nodded. Just be careful. A desperate Victor Caldwell's more dangerous than a confident one. After Walter left, Morgan hiked to the coordinates on Samuel's compass, retrieving the metal box she'd reburied. The original documents needed to be somewhere safer, somewhere Victor's men couldn't find them if they searched the cabin. She chose a hollow tree half a mile from the property, a landmark only she would recognize, and secreted the box inside, carefully concealing any sign of disturbance. The drive to Pinecrest took longer than she remembered, the mountain roads demanding full attention. The town had changed in 30 years, expanded at the edges, contracted at the core. Chain stores had replaced some of the family businesses she'd known, but Walter's General Store still stood proudly at the center, a testament to perseverance. The Pinecrest Senior Care Center sat on the outskirts, a modest single-story building surrounded by well-tended gardens. The receptionist was young and uncertain, but when Morgan mentioned she was there about Nathan Fletcher, the woman's expression softened. Oh, Mr. Fletcher used to visit Miss Eleanor every week. She took his death very hard. I'm sure she'd be glad to see a friend of his. Eleanor Dixon's room was on the east wing, overlooking a small garden, brown with winter. The woman who answered Morgan's knock was rail-thin but sharp-eyed, with white hair cut practically short. Miss Dixon, my name is Morgan Reed. I know who you are. Eleanor's voice was surprisingly strong. Nathan talked about you. Come in. Come in. I've been expecting someone like you. The room was small but tidy, decorated with photographs and mementos of a long life. Eleanor settled into her chair and studied Morgan with the kind of thoroughness that came from a lifetime of reading people and situations. Nathan said if anything happened to him, someone would come asking questions about Victor Caldwell. Looks like he was right. You knew Nathan was in danger? I knew Victor doesn't let go of things. And Nathan was the last obstacle between Victor and that property. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. This will take a while. Eleanor had worked for Victor for 15 years, starting in the early 70s when she was a young bookkeeper fresh out of business school. Victor was charming back then. Told me he was helping mountain families monetize their properties, creating opportunities. I believed him. I wanted to believe him, but gradually she'd seen the truth. The families Victor helped often ended up with nothing. Their land transferred through complicated legal maneuvers they didn't understand. The accidents that befell property owners who refused to sell, the forged documents, the bribed officials, the threats disguised as friendly advice. I kept records of everything. Not because I planned to use them, I was too scared of Victor, but because I needed to know the truth about what I was part of. When I finally quit, Victor tried to buy my silence, offered me a small fortune to destroy my records. But you didn't. No, I kept them safe all these years. Told Victor if anything happened to me, everything would go to the authorities. It's kept me alive this long. She pulled a key from around her neck. This opens a safety deposit box at First Mountain Bank. Box 247. Everything's in there. 30 years of records, copies of forged documents, evidence of bribes, witness statements, everything. Morgan felt her heart racing. Why didn't you come forward before? Because I was a coward. Eleanor's voice was bitter. I told myself I was being practical, that one person couldn't take down someone like Victor. But the truth is I was scared. Scared of what he'd do, scared of losing what little I had. She looked at Morgan directly. But I'm 84 years old. What's Victor going to do, kill me? I'm already dying. Cancer. Doctor says 6 months, maybe less. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's clarifying, knowing your time's limited. Makes you think about legacy, about what you leave behind. I don't want my legacy to be silence in the face of evil. She handed Morgan the key. Nathan was supposed to get this if I died first. Now it's yours. Use it to finish what he couldn't. They spent the next 3 hours going through everything Eleanor remembered. She provided names of witnesses, explained Victor's corporate structure, detailed the shell companies and false fronts he used to hide his operations. She confirmed that Mountain Resources LLC was one of Victor's creations, established specifically to purchase mineral rights through fraudulent means. And she dropped one more bombshell. Victor's son works for him now, Garrett Caldwell, named after his grandfather, ironically enough. He's the one who handles the difficult properties, the ones where legal methods aren't working. He's smarter than his father, more subtle, and more ruthless. Morgan absorbed this information. Victor had a son involved in the operation, another generation carrying on the family business of theft and violence. Will you testify? In court, if it comes to that? Yes, I'll testify to everything I know. It's the only decent thing I've done in 40 years. Eleanor's hand shook slightly. But move fast. I don't know how much time I have, and Victor has ways of making witnesses disappear. Morgan left with the key, her mind racing with possibilities. She went directly to the bank, presented identification, and accessed the safety deposit box. Inside were ledgers, files, thumb drives, decades of evidence, meticulously organized and documented. Eleanor hadn't just kept records. She'd created a comprehensive case against Victor Caldwell. She took everything to Logan's office. He called in his most trusted deputy, and they spent hours reviewing the material. The evidence was damning. Fraud, forgery, bribery, possibly even conspiracy to commit murder. But building a prosecutable case would take time. We need to move carefully, Logan said. This much evidence, this many potential charges, we can't afford to make mistakes. Victor will have expensive lawyers. Every piece of evidence needs to be airtight. How long? A week, maybe 2. We need to verify everything. Get statements from living witnesses. Coordinate with the county prosecutor. Victor might not wait that long. I know. That's why I'm assigning protection. Deputy Wilson will stake out your property, keep watch for any trespasses. But Morgan shook her head. No, Victor's smart. If he sees official police presence, he'll know we're building he'll destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, maybe run. I need him to think he still has the upper hand. Morgan, that's too dangerous. I've lived through mountain winters with nothing but a rifle and determination. I can handle Victor Caldwell. They argued, but she was adamant. Finally, Logan relented with conditions. You wear a wire. You keep your satellite phone on at all times. And you don't confront him alone. You call for backup immediately if he shows up. She agreed, though she had no intention of waiting for backup if things went wrong. Backup took time. On the mountain, you survive by acting in the moment, not by waiting for help to arrive. Back at the cabin, Morgan prepared. She made copies of the most important documents, hid them in multiple locations on the property. She memorized key facts from Eleanor's records. She checked and rechecked her weapons, her emergency supplies, her escape routes. As evening fell, she noticed Lily Carson watching the cabin from the tree line, trying and failing to be stealthy. Morgan sighed, beckoning the girl forward. You're about as quiet as a moose in a china shop. How long have you been there? Lily emerged from the trees, slightly abashed. Only a few minutes. I wanted to see if you were okay. Mom said Mr. Caldwell's men were asking about you in town. A chill ran through Morgan. What kind of questions? Who you were, where you came from. If you had family. The girl's eyes were solemn. They didn't look friendly, those men. Morgan considered sending Lily home immediately, but hesitated. The girl had proven useful before, and having an extra pair of eyes might be valuable. But the risk? I need you to be very careful, Lily. These men aren't just businessmen. They're dangerous, I know. Lily's young face was surprisingly mature. That's why I came to warn you, and I found something else when I was walking home yesterday. She pulled a crumpled paper from her pocket, carefully smoothing it out. It had fallen out of one of the survey trucks, a map marked with lines and notations, not just of Morgan's property, but of the entire mountain range. Areas highlighted in different colors, with numbers and symbols Morgan didn't recognize. Can I keep this? Lily nodded. I made a copy for myself, too. I thought it might be important. Morgan studied the map, recognizing the scope of Victor's ambition. Not just her land. He wanted it all. The entire mountain range, reshaped according to his vision. You should go home now. It's getting dark. Morgan folded the map carefully, tucking it into her pocket. And Lily? Thank you. But stay away from the cabin for a while. It's not safe. The girl hesitated, clearly wanting to argue, but nodded reluctantly. I'll be careful. But if you need help, I know where to find you. After Lily left, Morgan reviewed everything she'd learned. The picture was clearer now. Victor's financial troubles, his son's aggressive expansion plans, Eleanor's comprehensive evidence, the scope of the proposed development, all the pieces fitting together into a pattern of greed, corruption, and violence spanning decades. She didn't sleep that night, instead positioning herself where she could watch the approaches to the cabin. The forest was alive with night sounds, the rustle of small creatures, the occasional call of a hunting owl, the whisper of wind through pine needles. Samuel had taught her to read these sounds, to know when they changed in response to human presence. Around 3 in the morning, the pattern shifted. The small creatures fell silent. The wind still moved the branches, but no animal stirred beneath them. Someone was coming. Morgan moved silently to the window, staying back in the shadows. Through the trees, she caught glimpses of movement, multiple people approaching, with the caution of men who knew they were trespassing. She counted at least 4, maybe more. They weren't making a direct approach, instead spreading out to surround the cabin. Professional tactics. A tall man was leading them, younger than Victor, but with something of the same calculating eyes, the same confident bearing. Garrett Caldwell, she presumed. The son carrying on the father's work. Morgan grabbed her satellite phone and texted Logan. They're here. Multiple hostiles. Don't announce arrival. Then she prepared. This was what she'd been training for. What all those years in the mountains had prepared her for. Not hunting animals, but defending ground that was hers by right and by blood. She didn't want violence, but if they forced her hand, she'd respond the way Samuel had taught her, with overwhelming force and absolute commitment. The men reached the clearing. Through the window, she could see them better now. 5 total, all wearing dark clothing, all carrying equipment. Not weapons she could see, but tools. Crowbars, a portable drill, what looked like surveying equipment. They were going to break in, search the place, maybe plant something, establish some kind of legal pretext for claiming the property. And if she was there, alone in the middle of the night, who would believe her version of events? Morgan moved to the door and opened it, standing in the threshold with her rifle clearly visible, but pointed at the ground. That's far enough, gentlemen. They froze. Garrett Caldwell stepped forward, his hands visible and empty. Ms. Reed, we're not here to cause trouble. We have a court order allowing us to survey at 3 in the morning with crowbars. Try again. His smile was cold, calculated. We were told the property was unoccupied. We didn't want to disturb anyone during normal business hours. The property is occupied by me, and you're trespassing. Leave now, or I'll defend my home under Montana law. Ms. Reed, I don't think you understand the situation. This property is subject to multiple claims. There are no multiple claims. The deed is in my name, free and clear. Your father's fraudulent documents don't change that. Something shifted in his expression. Be very careful about making accusations like that. They're not accusations, they're facts. Facts supported by 30 years of evidence that I'll be presenting to the county prosecutor. Your father forged my mother's signature. He murdered Samuel Fletcher. And he spent 3 decades stealing from families too scared to fight back. That ends now. The men behind Garrett stirred, hands moving toward their belts. Morgan raised her rifle, not aiming, but ready. I'm wearing a wire. The sheriff has been notified. Every word you say is being recorded. So before you do something stupid, think about whether you want to add assault or attempted murder to the charges you're already facing. For a long moment, nobody moved. The mountain wind whispered through the trees, cold and knowing. Then sirens sounded in the distance. Logan arriving with backup. Garrett Caldwell smiled, but there was no warmth in it. This isn't over. Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet. He and his men retreated to the tree line just as Logan's vehicles arrived, lights flashing blue and red across the snow. The final confrontation was coming, but tonight Morgan had won the first real battle. She lowered her rifle and watched them disappear into the forest, knowing that Victor would come next. The son had failed. Now the father would try. and she'd be ready. Logan was furious when he arrived, his face flushed with anger and concern. They could have killed you, Morgan. What were you thinking, confronting armed men alone? Morgan's gaze remained fixed on the tree line where Garrett and his men had disappeared. They weren't here to kill me. Not yet. They wanted to search the cabin, find Nathan's evidence, or maybe plant something, drugs, stolen property, something to justify a police raid. Logan's deputy confirmed 5 sets of footprints surrounding the cabin, just as Morgan had described. One of the men had dropped a crowbar in their hasty retreat, not standard equipment for surveyors. I want a patrol car here 24/7. Logan's tone brooked no argument this time. We got lucky tonight. We might not be so lucky next time. Morgan reluctantly agreed. After what she'd seen in Garrett's eyes, she knew the stakes had risen. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was personal. She'd challenged the Caldwells publicly, accused them of murder. They wouldn't let that stand. The next morning, Walter arrived with news. Victor Caldwell checked into the Grand Hotel last night. He's called a special meeting of the county commission for tomorrow. Sources say he's going to propose a major resort development, economic revitalization for the entire region. The timing's not coincidental. Morgan poured coffee for both of them. He's moving fast, trying to create momentum before we can stop him. Walter nodded grimly. Got more bad news. Judge Hamilton signed off on an inspection warrant for your property. Says there's reasonable cause to believe you're violating environmental regulations. Judge Hamilton, Logan had mentioned him, another official in Victor's pocket. That's their next move. They'll come back with official papers, legal authority, probably. Walter's expression was troubled. But there's something else. A rental truck was seen on the old logging road near your property line. Sheriff's deputy checked it out. Driver said they were bird watchers. Since when do bird watchers need a rental truck? Morgan felt the pieces clicking into place. Victor wasn't just coming to negotiate or intimidate. He was planning something bigger. The rental truck suggested equipment, maybe personnel. He was done being patient. That night, Morgan barely slept. She lay in the darkness, listening to every sound, her rifle within reach. The cabin was silent except for the wind outside and the settling of old timbers. But something felt wrong. That instinct Samuel had taught her to trust, the sense that predators were near. At dawn, Logan arrived with his most trusted deputy, Jim Wilson. They'd spent the night planning, coordinating with county officials they were certain weren't in Victor's pocket. Eleanor Dixon has agreed to make a recorded statement, Logan said. We're bringing in a district attorney from the state capitol, someone with no connections to Victor. But we need to move her someplace safe first. Victor has too many eyes and ears around here. Morgan nodded, understanding the stakes. Eleanor was their star witness, the one person who could connect all the dots across decades of corruption and crime. If Victor got to her first, I'll go with you to pick her up. 2 sets of eyes are better than one. As they prepared to leave, Morgan's satellite phone rang. The nursing home. Eleanor Dixon had suffered a severe turn in her condition overnight. The doctor wasn't optimistic. We need to go. Now. Morgan grabbed her jacket, already heading for the door. If she dies without giving that statement. They drove to Pinecrest in tense silence, the implications hanging between them. Had Eleanor's condition deteriorated naturally? Or had Victor somehow accelerated it? Morgan remembered Nathan's sudden heart attack. No history of cardiac issues, no warning signs, just a quick, unexpected death that benefited Victor enormously. The nursing home was quiet when they arrived, the morning sun casting long shadows through the windows. Eleanor's room was at the end of the hall, the door closed. A doctor emerged as they approached, his expression grave. She's conscious, but weak. Keep it brief, and try not to agitate her. Eleanor lay in the bed, her already thin frame somehow diminished further, her skin nearly translucent. But her eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, still burned with intelligence and purpose. I figured you'd come. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Victor's making his move, isn't he? Logan set up a small recorder on the bedside table. Eleanor, we need your official statement. Everything you told Morgan about Victor's operations, the forged documents, the bribes. Can you do that for us? The old woman nodded weakly. I've been waiting 30 years to tell this story properly. I'm not going to let a little thing like dying stop me now. For the next hour, Eleanor Dixon spoke, haltingly at times, but with remarkable clarity and detail. She named names, provided dates, described exactly how Victor had manipulated property records, intimidated landowners, bribed officials. She explained his corporate structure, the shell companies, the method behind his 30-year campaign to acquire the mountain properties, and she confirmed what Morgan had long suspected. Victor had been directly responsible for Samuel Fletcher's death. He didn't push Samuel himself. Eleanor's voice grew weaker but more urgent. He never does the dirty work directly. It was a man named Ray Donovan, one of his fixers. Victor told me to pay him $10,000 in cash the day after Samuel died. When I asked what it was for, Victor just smiled and said, "Problem solving." Logan leaned forward. "You're saying Victor Caldwell hired Ray Donovan to kill Samuel Fletcher?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, and I've got the ledger entry to prove it. It's in the safety deposit box. Page 42, October 1990, payment recorded as consulting services. Can you identify Ray Donovan?" Eleanor's eyes closed briefly, her strength clearly waning. Tall man, military background, cold eyes. Victor used him for special problems for years. Last I heard, he was in prison for something unrelated. Weapons charges, I think. The doctor returned, insisting they let Eleanor rest. As they prepared to leave, she grasped Morgan's hand with surprising strength. "There's one more thing. Not in the records. Victor has a weakness, his son, Garrett. He'd do anything for that boy, break any law, hurt anyone who threatened him. That's your leverage. If you want Victor, go through Garrett." Morgan squeezed the fragile hand gently. "Thank you, Eleanor, for everything." The old bookkeeper's eyes were already closing, exhaustion claiming her. "Just get him, Morgan. For all of us, he's hurt. For Samuel and Nathan, make him answer for what he's done." Outside, Logan and Morgan compared notes, the recorded testimony safely stored in both digital and physical form. They had what they needed now, not just documentation of decades-old crimes, but direct testimony connecting Victor to Samuel's murder. "It's time to bring him in," Logan said. "I'll coordinate with the state police, make sure we've got backup that isn't compromised. We move tomorrow." As they drove back toward the cabin, Morgan stared out at the passing forest, her thoughts on Eleanor's final revelation. Victor's weakness was his son, the same son who'd led men to break into her cabin, who'd looked at her with cold calculation, who was carrying on his father's legacy of corruption and theft. The mountains had taught her that every predator, no matter how dangerous, had a vulnerability. Samuel had shown her how to find those weaknesses, how to exploit them. If Victor would do anything to protect his son, then perhaps Garrett was both the threat and the key to ending this decades-long battle. The cabin came into view, peaceful in the afternoon sun. But as they approached, Morgan noticed something wrong. The door was slightly ajar, though she was certain she'd locked it before leaving. Logan drew his weapon, signaling for her to stay back while he approached cautiously. The interior had been ransacked, drawers emptied, furniture overturned, floorboards pried up. Someone had searched thoroughly, methodically, looking for something specific. Nathan's letters and documents were gone. Every piece of evidence Morgan had kept in the cabin had vanished. But she smiled grimly, confusing Logan with her apparent lack of concern. They won't find what they're looking for. The important documents were never here. I moved them after Garrett's first visit. Smart. But this means they're desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. As they surveyed the damage, Morgan's satellite phone rang. An unfamiliar number, but she answered it anyway. The voice on the other end sent ice through her veins. "Ms. Reed, Victor Caldwell here. I believe it's time you and I had a proper conversation about your property and your accusations. Perhaps we could meet, just the two of us. I assure you I only want to resolve this situation amicably." His voice was smooth, cultured, nothing like what she'd expected from a man capable of murder and decades of corruption. But beneath that polish, she heard the steel, the absolute certainty that he would get what he wanted one way or another. "Where?" "The Grand Hotel. My suite. 7 o'clock this evening. Come alone, Ms. Reed. This is between you and me, After he hung up, Logan shook his head emphatically. It's a trap, Morgan. He's trying to get you alone, away from witnesses. Of course it is. Morgan checked her pistol, ensuring it was loaded and ready. But it's also an opportunity. If I can get him talking, get him to admit what he did to Samuel. Logan's face hardened. Not without a wire. Not without backup. I've lost too many friends to Victor Caldwell's schemes. I'm not losing you too. They spent the next 3 hours planning. Logan arranged for surveillance of the Grand Hotel, positioning deputies in the lobby, the restaurant, the hallways outside Victor's suite. Morgan would wear a wire, transmitting everything to a van parked across the street. At the first sign of trouble, they'd move in. As evening approached, Morgan prepared herself mentally for the confrontation she'd been building toward for days. The man who'd killed Samuel, who'd hounded Nathan to his grave, who'd tried to steal her land and her history. She would face him on his territory, surrounded by his people, but she wouldn't be intimidated. The mountain woman who'd survived brutal winters and hungry predators wasn't afraid of a man like Victor Caldwell. She'd look him in the eye and let him know that his time was up, that 30 years of corruption and violence were about to end, that Samuel and Nathan would finally have justice. She tucked the wire beneath her shirt, checked her pistol one last time, and nodded to Logan. Let's finish this. The Grand Hotel stood in stark contrast to the modest buildings surrounding it, 5 stories of Victorian elegance, a relic from the town's mining heyday. Morgan entered through the ornate lobby, aware of Logan's deputies positioned strategically throughout the space, pretending to read newspapers or enjoy drinks at the bar. The elevator attendant took her to the top floor, where Victor's suite occupied the entire west wing. A man in a dark suit, security, not hotel staff, opened the door after she knocked, ushering her into a lavishly appointed sitting room with panoramic views of the mountains she called home. And there he was, Victor Caldwell. Older than in the photographs, his hair now white, his face lined with age. But his eyes were unchanged, cold, calculating, assessing her worth and weakness in a single glance. He rose from his chair with the fluid grace of a man 20 years younger, extending his hand in greeting. Ms. Reed, thank you for coming. I've looked forward to meeting the woman who's caused such a stir in my organization. Please sit. We have much to discuss. The confrontation 30 years in the making had finally begun, and Morgan was ready. Victor Caldwell gestured toward a leather chair positioned near the fireplace, where flames danced over seasoned oak. The suite was a study in calculated opulence, crystal decanters, original art, furniture that whispered old money. A chessboard sat on a side table mid-game, pieces arrayed in complex strategy. Morgan remained standing, studying the man who'd cast such a long shadow over Samuel and Nathan's lives. I prefer to stand. This isn't a social call. Victor's smile didn't falter as he returned to his own chair, crossing one leg over the other with practiced ease. As you wish. Scotch? 30-year single malt. Seems appropriate given our history. Morgan ignored the offer. Where's your son? I expected Garrett would be here for this. A flicker of something, annoyance, concern, crossed Victor's face before the mask slipped back into place. My son has other matters to attend to this evening. This is between us. The older generation, those who remember Samuel Fletcher. You mean the man you murdered? Victor's laugh held no warmth, straight to accusations. I can see why Samuel liked you. No patience for pleasantries or pretense. His fingers traced the rim of his crystal tumbler. But murder is such an ugly word, Ms. Reed, and difficult to prove after 3 decades. Not with Eleanor Dixon's testimony. Morgan watched his reaction carefully. She's given a full statement. Names, dates, financial records, everything. The slightest tightening around Victor's eyes, the first crack in his composure. Eleanor, she always was meticulous with records. A valuable quality in a bookkeeper, less so in a former employee with misplaced loyalties. She kept evidence of the payment you made to Ray Donovan, $10,000 in Bashi, the day after Samuel died, classified as consulting services. Victor's gaze hardened, but his voice remained controlled. Eleanor is dying. Cancer, I understand. Terminal patients often become confused. Their memories unreliable. No court would. We have the ledgers, the bank records. Witnesses who saw Donovan on the mountain the day Samuel died. Morgan leaned forward, closing the distance between them. And Ray Donovan himself is willing to talk, in exchange for consideration on his current sentence. This last part was a bluff. Logan had located Donovan in a federal prison in Colorado, but hadn't yet approached him. But the gambit worked. Victor's hand tightened on the armrest, knuckles whitening. "You've been busy." Victor's voice had lost its casual tone. "I underestimated you, Miss Reed, just as I underestimated Nathan's persistence. The Fletcher men were stubborn, but eventually they yielded to inevitable circumstances. Nathan didn't yield. He fought you for 30 years, and now I'm finishing what he started." Victor studied her for a long moment, calculating, reassessing. Then he set his glass down and leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Let me be direct. The mineral deposits under that mountain are worth tens of millions, maybe more. The resort development will generate revenue for this entire region for generations to come. Why fight progress? Why cling to the past?" "Progress?" Morgan's voice dripped contempt. "You'll gut that mountain, poison the watershed, destroy forests that stood for centuries. All for what? More money you don't need? Another notch on your belt? For legacy, Miss Reed, something you should understand." Victor gestured toward the window where the mountains loomed in the gathering darkness. "I'm building something that will outlast me, that my son will inherit. What are you protecting? A ruined cabin? The ghosts of two old men who wasted their lives in isolation?" The words struck deeper than Morgan wanted to admit. She had abandoned those men, left them to fight alone while she built a separate life in the valley. What right did she have now to claim their cause as her own? But then she remembered Samuel's patient teaching, Nathan's decades of faithful stewardship, the letters in which he never once blamed her for leaving. They had protected something precious, not just for themselves, but for her, for the future. Those men understood what legacy really means. Not concrete and steel, not bank accounts and corporate holdings. They protected that land because it has value beyond money, beyond anything you could possibly understand. Victor's expression hardened. Noble sentiments, but ultimately irrelevant. He stood abruptly, crossing to a desk where he retrieved a document folder. "I'd planned to offer you $5 million, a generous price for sentimentality, but given your accusations, I'm withdrawing that offer." Morgan felt the wire against her skin. Knew Logan and his deputies were listening to every word. Keep him talking, that was the plan. Get him to incriminate himself further. What happens if I refuse to sell? Another accident? Like Samuel's? Victor's smile was cold. Accidents happen in the mountains, especially to people who live alone. Hike alone, hunt alone. Is that a threat? An observation? He returned to his chair, studying her with newfound interest. "You know, I offered Samuel a fair price too. $1 million. A fortune in '93. He laughed in my face, called me a grave robber, a thief of other people's dreams, because he saw exactly what you were. What I am, Ms. Reed, is a businessman. When I want something, I acquire it. When something stands in my way, I remove it. Samuel Fletcher stood in my way." Victor's eyes locked with hers, "and now it seems so do you." There it was, not quite a confession, but close. Morgan felt her pulse quickening, wondering if it would be enough, just a little more. "You had Samuel pushed off that cliff, just like you arranged Nathan's heart attack." Victor's eyebrows rose. Heart attack? Nathan died of natural causes. Even I can't orchestrate cardiac arrest. But there was something in his tone, a note of insincerity that made Morgan wonder. Had Nathan's death truly been natural? Or was there something more sinister, something that even Eleanor hadn't known about? Before she could press further, a knock at the door interrupted them. Victor's security man entered, leaning close to whisper something in his employer's ear. Victor's expression darkened momentarily before smoothing into practiced neutrality. "It seems our conversation must be cut short. My son requires my attention on an urgent matter." Victor stood, buttoning his suit jacket with elegant precision. "Consider my offer, Ms. Reed. $5 million. A new life anywhere you choose. Or stay and face unpredictable mountain weather." Morgan stood her ground. "I'm not going anywhere, Victor, and neither is the evidence we've gathered. Even if something happens to me, it all goes public. Every dirty deal, every bribe, every suspicious death connected to your developments. Your legacy will be prison bars, not mountain resorts. A flare of genuine anger crossed Victor's face, quickly controlled but revealing. You sound just like him, like Samuel. The same self-righteous certainty, the same failure to understand the inevitable. The inevitable? Progress, Ms. Reed, change. The future coming, whether you welcome it or not. Victor moved toward the door. Samuel couldn't stop it. Nathan couldn't stop it, and neither can you. As the door closed behind him, Morgan exhaled slowly, tension draining from her shoulders. She'd gotten what they needed. Implied threats, practical admission of his role in Samuel's death, consciousness of guilt. Combined with Eleanor's testimony and the documentary evidence, it might be enough. She touched the hidden microphone. Did you get all that? Logan's voice crackled through the small earpiece she wore. Every word. That's enough to bring him in for questioning. Meet us in the lobby. We're moving now. Morgan headed for the elevator, hyper-aware of her surroundings. Victor's abrupt departure felt wrong. The urgency, the mention of his son. Something was happening that she didn't understand, and in her experience, unknown variables were usually dangerous. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, where Logan waited with 3 deputies, their expressions grim with purpose. Hotel guests stared as they conferred in hushed tones, formulating their next move. Victor's suite is empty. He left through a service entrance. Logan's jaw tightened with frustration. But we've got patrol cars watching all roads out of town. He won't get far. It's not Victor I'm worried about. Morgan scanned the lobby, unable to shake the feeling of impending threat. It's Garrett. What urgent business pulled Victor away so suddenly? Logan's radio crackled with static, then a frantic voice. Sheriff, multiple reports of a fire at the Pinecrest Senior Center. Witnesses saw someone fleeing the scene. Possible arson. Eleanor. The realization hit them simultaneously. Morgan was already moving toward the door, Logan close behind. The Senior Center blazed against the night sky, orange flames licking up the eastern wing where Eleanor's room was located. Fire trucks screamed into the parking lot, crews deploying with practiced efficiency. But Morgan knew with sickening certainty that they were too late. A nurse confirmed her fears, tears streaming down soot-stained cheeks. We got most residents out, but Ms. Dixon, her room was already engulfed when we reached that wing. We couldn't get to her. Logan's face hardened into granite as he conferred with the fire chief. Witnesses reported a man matching Garrett Caldwell's description, leaving the scene minutes before the alarm sounded. Gasoline accelerant. Targeted blaze concentrated on the east wing. They killed her. Morgan's voice was flat with controlled rage. They silenced the one witness who could connect Victor directly to Samuel's murder. Not the only witness, Logan reminded her. We have her recorded testimony, the bank records. And now this arson, it shows consciousness of guilt. They're getting desperate, making mistakes. As they watched the firefighters battle the blaze, Morgan's satellite phone rang. Walter Jenkins, his voice tight with urgency. Morgan, they're headed your way. Garrett and 4 men in a black SUV, armed, passed my store 10 minutes ago, moving fast toward the mountain road. The cabin. Of course, with Eleanor gone, they'd target the property itself, destroy any remaining evidence, perhaps burn the cabin as they'd burned the senior center. Erase Samuel and Nathan's legacy completely. Go, Logan urged, already heading for his patrol SUV. I'll coordinate from here, send backup once we contain this situation. But Morgan, don't engage them alone. Observe only. Wait for backup. Morgan nodded, knowing even as she did that she would do whatever was necessary to protect the land. Logan knew it too. She saw the resignation in his eyes, the understanding that she, like Samuel before her, would defend what was hers regardless of the risk. The drive back to the mountain was a race against time, her truck straining on the curves, headlights carving a desperate path through darkness. The logging road was rutted nightmare, worse at night, but Morgan pushed on, muscle memory guiding her where visibility failed. She killed the lights and engine a quarter-mile from the cabin, approaching on foot through forests she knew by heart. The black SUV Logan had mentioned was already there, parked in the clearing, empty. 5 men moved around the cabin perimeter, Garrett Caldwell directing the others with quiet authority. 2 carried red gas cans. Another unspooled something that looked like detonation cord. Not just arson. They planned to obliterate the cabin completely. Morgan circled wide, staying downwind, using the techniques Samuel had taught her for approaching wary game. The men were focused on their task, unaware of her presence as she positioned herself on the ridge above the clearing. Rifle ready. The satellite phone vibrated silently in her pocket. Logan no doubt warning her to wait for backup. But backup would come too late. She had to act now. Taking careful aim at the ground near the men's feet, Morgan fired a single shot. The crack echoed across the clearing, sending the men diving for cover. That's far enough. Morgan pitched her voice to Carrie without revealing her exact position. The police are on their way. You're trespassing on private property with intent to commit arson. I suggest you leave while you still can. Garrett recovered quickly, scanning the ridgeline, trying to locate her. His voice carried a practiced calm that didn't match the tension in his posture. Ms. Reed, this is a misunderstanding. We're simply conducting a safety inspection of an abandoned structure. With gasoline and demolition charges? Try again. Morgan shifted position slightly, keeping to the shadows. Your father already threatened me tonight. Now you're here to follow through, just like you followed through with Eleanor Dixon. A flicker of something, surprise, concern, crossed Garrett's face at the mention of Eleanor. But it wasn't the reaction Morgan expected from a man who'd just committed murder. It was more like confusion. I don't know what you're talking about. Garrett signaled his men to spread out, searching for her position. My father sent me to secure the property, that's all. Any documents, evidence you might have hidden. He said nothing about Eleanor Dixon. The senior center is burning as we speak. Eleanor is dead. The police already have witnesses who saw you there. Garrett's expression shifted from confusion to genuine shock. What? That's impossible. I've been here for the past 2 hours setting up. Ask my men. The men muttered agreement, and Morgan felt the first flicker of doubt. If Garrett had been here, who had set the fire? Who had Victor spoken with on the phone? A third player, perhaps. Someone else doing Victor's bidding while his son handled the cabin. Layers of deniability, just as Eleanor had described. Victor never doing the dirty work directly. Regardless, you're trespassing, planning to destroy my property. Morgan kept her rifle steady, put down the gasoline and stepped away from the cabin. Instead, Garrett reached slowly into his jacket pocket, producing a document. I have a demolition order, Miss Reed, signed by Judge Hamilton this afternoon. This structure has been condemned as unsafe, another of Victor's corrupt officials, no doubt. But even a fraudulent court order complicated matters. If they arrested Garrett now, his expensive lawyers would argue he was simply executing a legal directive, however questionable its provenance. Morgan needed something more concrete, needed to catch them in an unambiguous criminal act that no amount of legal maneuvering could disguise. That order is based on false premises. You know it, I know it. Your father arranged it after he failed to intimidate me into selling. Garrett's laugh held no humor. My father doesn't fail, Miss Reed. He gets what he wants, one way or another. Always has, even if it means murder. Samuel Fletcher, Nathan, now Eleanor Dixon. Garrett hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, Morgan saw something unexpected. Genuine discomfort, perhaps even ignorance. Was it possible Garrett didn't know the full extent of his father's crimes? Before she could press further, headlights appeared on the logging road. Victor's distinctive Range Rover approaching at speed. Backup for Garrett, not for her. The odds were worsening by the minute. Morgan weighed her options. She could retreat, disappear into the forest where they'd never find her in the darkness. She could maintain her position, hope that Logan's deputies arrived before Victor's men overpowered her. Or she could change the game entirely. In that moment, she remembered Eleanor's final words. Victor's weakness is his son. Garrett is your leverage. A calculated risk formed in her mind. Dangerous, potentially fatal, but possibly their only chance to bring Victor to justice. Morgan shifted her aim, sighting on Garrett with deliberate clarity. Here's what happens now. You call your men off. You drop the gasoline. You step away from my cabin. Or I put a bullet through you before your father gets up that road. Garrett froze, recognizing the deadly seriousness in her voice. You wouldn't. That's murder. You'd go to prison. Like your father went to prison for Samuel? For Nathan? The barrel of her rifle remained steady. I've got nothing to lose, Garrett. Your father made sure of that when he killed the two men I loved most in this world. The Range Rover pulled into the clearing, headlights illuminating the tense tableau. Victor emerged, taking in the scene with one comprehensive glance. His son under rifle threat, his men frozen in indecision, the cabin still intact. Morgan Reed. Victor's voice carried the weight of authority, of absolute certainty in his own invulnerability. Put down the rifle. We both know you're not a killer. Maybe not, but Samuel taught me to protect what's mine, and I'm a very good shot. Morgan didn't move her aim from Garrett. One bullet. That's all it would take. Is your resort worth your son's life, Victor? Something shifted in Victor's expression. The first genuine emotion Morgan had seen from him. Fear. Not for himself, but for his son. The weakness Eleanor had identified. What do you want? The question emerged reluctantly, as if pulled from him against his will. The truth. Confess what you did to Samuel Fletcher. What you arranged for Eleanor Dixon tonight. End this. Victor's laugh held a bitter edge. And then what? I go to prison based on my own confession? I'm not a fool, Ms. Reed. Then we stay here until the police arrive. Morgan kept her rifle trained on Garrett, and your son remains in my sights until they do. The sound of approaching sirens filtered through the trees, distant yet, but growing closer. Logan's backup finally arriving. Victor heard it too, his expression calculating as he reassessed his options. What he did next stunned Morgan. Stand down, Victor ordered his men, who looked at him in confusion. Move away from the cabin. Put down the equipment. Father, we can't just, Garrett began, but Victor cut him off. Do as she says, all of you. The men obeyed reluctantly, abandoning their arson preparations, moving away from the cabin. Victor approached slowly, hands visible, stopping at the foot of the ridge where Morgan maintained her position. Let my son go, please. Victor's voice had lost its polish, its certainty. I'll tell you what you want to know. Just let Garrett leave. Morgan studied him carefully, looking for deception. But all she saw was a father's fear for his son. Genuine, unfeigned vulnerability in a man who had likely never begged for anything in his life. Your son stays until I hear the truth. All of it. Victor's shoulders sagged with something like resignation. He glanced at the approaching sirens, then back at Morgan, making his decision. I arranged Samuel Fletcher's death. Not directly. I never do anything directly. But I made it happen. Victor's voice carried no emotion now, just flat statement of fact. He was going to the sheriff the next day with evidence of my land schemes. I couldn't allow that. And Nathan? Did you arrange his heart attack too? A flicker of surprise crossed Victor's face. No, that was unexpected. Convenient but natural. I had other plans for Nathan, more legal pressure. The heart attack was simply good fortune. For me, not for him, obviously. Morgan believed him, strangely enough. The surprise had seemed genuine. And Eleanor Dixon? The fire tonight? Victor's expression darkened. That was unauthorized initiative. One of my security team, trying to impress me by eliminating a threat. I didn't order it. From the corner of her eye, Morgan saw Garrett's shock. Genuine disbelief at his father's casual confession of murder. The son had known about the shady business practices, perhaps, but not this. Not murder. You're lying. Garrett's voice cracked with the force of his denial. Tell her you're lying, Father. Victor didn't look at his son. His eyes remained fixed on Morgan, on the rifle trained at Garrett's chest. I've done what you asked. I've confessed. Now let my son go. The sirens were closer now, red and blue lights visible through the trees as patrol cars navigated the logging road. Morgan kept her rifle steady, waiting. One more thing. The compass Samuel gave me, the coordinates. What was hidden there? Victor's laugh held no humor. The original mineral surveys, documentation of rare earth deposits worth millions. The geological reports I tried to buy, then steal. Samuel knew what he had, knew its value, and refused to sell, refused to be part of what he called the hollowing out of the mountains. And for that, you killed him. For that, I removed an obstacle to progress, to the future. Victor's voice had found its smooth certainty again, even as he confessed to murder. The weak make way for the strong, Ms. Reed. That's the law of nature, of business. The patrol cars pulled into the clearing, deputies emerging with weapons drawn. Logan stepped forward, taking in the scene with professional efficiency. Victor Caldwell, you're under arrest for the murder of Samuel Fletcher, conspiracy to commit arson, and criminal threatening. The sheriff's voice carried absolute authority as he approached, handcuffs ready. This is absurd. I've admitted nothing. Victor's composure slipped back into place, his momentary vulnerability vanishing as if it had never existed. You have no evidence, no witnesses. Eleanor Dixon is dead. We have your confession. Recorded just now. Logan nodded toward Morgan. Every word. Victor's head snapped toward Morgan, realization dawning. The wire. The meeting at the hotel. Now this. He'd been played, manipulated into confession by the threat to his son. You can't use that. It was obtained under duress, with threat of violence. Victor's voice held the confidence of a man accustomed to legal maneuvering. No court would admit such evidence. Maybe not, Logan conceded, securing the handcuffs. But we have Eleanor's sworn statement, recorded before her death. We have the financial records linking you to Ray Donovan. And now we have attempted arson, with multiple witnesses. As the deputies led Victor toward a patrol car, Garrett remained frozen, staring at his father with new understanding. The son confronting his father's true nature for the first time, the corruption deeper, darker than he had known or wanted to acknowledge. Morgan lowered her rifle finally, exhaustion washing over her as the adrenaline ebbed. The night had brought justice, but at terrible cost. Eleanor was gone. The cabin had nearly been destroyed. And even with Victor in custody, the fight wasn't over. There would be legal battles, corrupt officials to neutralize, evidence to protect. But Samuel would have been proud. Nathan, too. She had stood her ground, defended what was precious, brought a predator to account after 30 years of unchecked destruction. The mountain had taught her well. 3 months later, Morgan stood at the overlook where Samuel had died, the place where Victor had arranged his murder 3 decades ago. The snow had melted, giving way to early spring. Wildflowers dotted the meadow below, and the creek ran high with snowmelt, its sound carrying on the wind. She'd come to scatter ashes. Victor had been convicted on all charges: murder, conspiracy, fraud. The trial had been swift, the evidence overwhelming. With his recorded confession and Eleanor's devastating testimony preserved on video before her death, there was no defense. He'd been sentenced to life without parole. In custody, he'd finally looked like what he was, a bitter old man who'd wasted his life chasing wealth at the cost of his humanity. Garrett Caldwell had received a reduced sentence, 15 years, in exchange for cooperation. He'd provided testimony about his father's operations, helped authorities unravel decades of fraud. Caldwell Land Development had collapsed, its assets seized, its ill-gotten properties returned to rightful owners or sold to pay restitution. But today wasn't about Victor or justice or legal victories. Today was about remembrance. Morgan opened the first urn, Nathan's ashes, which she'd claimed from the county. His will had specified cremation, but had said nothing about where to scatter the remains. She believed she knew where he'd want to be. I'm sorry I left, Morgan whispered to the wind, to the mountain, to Nathan's memory. I'm sorry I wasn't here when you needed me, but I'm here now, and I'm going to take care of this place the way you did, the way Samuel did. It's going to stay wild and free, the way it should be. She scattered his ashes over the overlook, watching them catch the wind and spread across the slope. Nathan would be part of the mountain now, part of the land he'd spent his life protecting. The second container held something different, a sapling, a young pine she'd grown from a seed collected on the property. She planted it there at the overlook, between where Samuel's ashes had been scattered years ago and where Nathan's were now joining the earth. The tree would grow slowly, patiently, the way mountains measured time. In 100 years, it would tower over this spot, providing shade and shelter. A living monument to two good men who'd valued land over wealth, integrity over comfort. She added soil, watered it from her canteen, and sat back on her heels. It's done. You can rest now. Back at the cabin, life had settled into a rhythm. She'd quit her guiding business in Pinecrest, moved to the mountain permanently. The cabin was winterized now, solar panels on the roof providing power, A new well ensuring clean water. She'd made it comfortable without making it soft. It was still a mountain cabin, still required you to earn your place here. Logan visited weekly, checking on her, but also just visiting. They'd grown closer through the trial, two old friends rediscovering what they'd once meant to each other. Nothing romantic. They were both too old and practical for that kind of complication. But companionship, shared history, the comfort of someone who understood. Walter came too, bringing supplies and gossip from town. The community had rallied around her during the trial, offering support and testimony. People remembered Samuel fondly, remembered how he'd helped them. That goodwill had extended to her, the woman who'd avenged his death and protected his legacy. Lily Carson had become a regular visitor, eager to learn everything Morgan could teach. The girl soaked up knowledge like dry earth takes rain, tracking, plant identification, the subtle signs that revealed the mountain's moods and secrets. Morgan saw in her the same hunger for connection to the wild that she herself had felt at that age, the same need to understand something larger and more enduring than human concerns. The cabin was full of memories now. Nathan's letters in a box by the bed, Samuel's rifle mounted over the fireplace, the compass still around her neck. But there were new memories too. Trail cameras she checked weekly, documenting the wildlife that moved through the property. A garden she was planning for spring using seeds from a catalog Walter had brought. Books borrowed from the library in town, their spines cracked and comfortable. She'd started writing too, not a journal like Samuel's, but letters. Letters to her mother, saying the things she'd never said when Helen was alive. She didn't mail them. There was nowhere to mail them to. But writing them brought a kind of peace, forgiveness maybe, or at least understanding. Her mother had been a victim too, manipulated and used by Victor, dying with guilt for something she hadn't even actually done. Morgan couldn't change the past, couldn't repair their broken relationship, but she could choose not to carry anger anymore, could choose to remember the good things, few though they were, and let the rest go. One evening, as the sun set behind the ridge, Morgan sat on the porch with coffee, watching the mountain turn gold and purple in the fading light. This view, this exact view, was what Samuel had protected, what Nathan had fought for, what she'd nearly lost. She thought about the two wooden crates that had started everything. They sat empty now in the root cellar, their contents absorbed into her life, their secrets revealed. Someone had left them, knowing she'd return, knowing she'd need the truth they contained. Nathan, probably. Nathan, who'd kept faith for 30 years, who'd believed she'd come back even when she didn't believe it herself. "I'm home," she said to the mountain, to the memories, to the future taking shape around her. "I'm finally home." A raven called from the ridge, harsh, knowing, approving. The wind carried the scent of pine and snowmelt and possibility. Inside the cabin, a fire waited to be lit, dinner waited to be cooked, another peaceful evening waited to unfold. She'd spent 30 years running from this place, building a life that felt safe but incomplete. Now at 62, she'd finally stopped running, had planted herself here as firmly as the sapling on the overlook, ready to grow, to endure, to become part of the landscape. The mountain had reclaimed her, and she'd reclaimed it right back. Some things she'd learned weren't meant to be left behind. Some places called you back, no matter how far you ran. And some legacies were worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. Tomorrow, Lily would arrive for another lesson, tracking deer through spring mud, identifying edible plants emerging from winter dormancy. Logan would stop by with news from town, maybe stay for dinner. The rhythm of this new life, so similar to the one she'd abandoned 3 decades ago, yet deepened by experience, by loss, by the knowledge of what truly mattered. The civil case against Caldwell Land Development continued. Lawyers untangling decades of fraud, of stolen properties and forged documents. Morgan had hired her own attorney, using part of the settlement money to help other families recover what Victor had taken from them. It would take years to set everything right, to heal the damage one man's greed had inflicted on the mountain community. But time was something Morgan had in abundance now. The patience Samuel had taught her, the persistence Nathan had demonstrated, these were her inheritance as much as the cabin, the land, the legal documents that established her right to this place. A vehicle approached on the logging road. Logan's patrol SUV, right on schedule. He'd promised to bring the final paperwork from the district attorney's office, the documents that would formally close Samuel's case after 30 years. Morgan stood, stretching muscles stiff from sitting. The coffee had gone cold, but that didn't matter. What mattered was this moment, this mountain, this life she'd reclaimed from the past and was building toward the future. Samuel had died protecting this land. Nathan had spent his life maintaining it, waiting for her return. Now it was her turn to be steward, guardian, keeper of something precious that extended beyond her own lifetime. The responsibility felt right, felt like coming full circle after decades of wandering. The mountain would outlast her, just as it had outlasted Samuel and Nathan. The saplings she'd planted would grow into a towering pine. The creek would continue flowing. The forest would renew itself through fire and ice and time. And maybe someday someone else would discover this place, would feel its power, would choose to protect it as she had done. That was legacy, not Victor's resorts or bank accounts, but this, the preservation of something wild and true, something that gave more than it took, something that connected past to future in an unbroken chain of stewardship and care. Logan's vehicle pulled into the clearing, and Morgan went to meet him, ready for whatever came next. The mountain would provide, as it always had, everything she truly needed. A home, a purpose, a place to belong. It would be enough, more than enough. It would be everything. 6 months later, Morgan woke to the first snowfall of winter, fat, silent flakes transforming the forest into something magical and new. The cabin was warm, the stove having kept its heat through the night. She'd spent the fall making preparations, splitting and stacking firewood, preserving garden produce, repairing the roof and windows to withstand the coming season. Lily had helped, coming up after school and on weekends, eager to learn, to be part of something real and meaningful. The girl had a natural aptitude for mountain living, an instinctive understanding of weather patterns and wildlife behavior that reminded Morgan of herself at that age. Teaching Lily felt like passing on Samuel's knowledge, creating continuity where there might have been only loss. As Morgan made coffee, a knock sounded at the door. Walter bringing mail and news from town. The old storekeeper stomped snow from his boots before entering, his breath visible in the morning cold. "Thought you'd want to see this right away." He handed her a legal document bearing the seal of the federal court. "The final disposition of Victor's assets, your portion of the settlement." Morgan opened it carefully. The federal prosecutors had seized Victor's empire, dismantling it piece by piece. The legitimate portions had been sold, the proceeds divided among his victims, those who could be identified after decades of fraud and manipulation. Her share was substantial, more money than she'd ever possessed, more than she'd earned in 20 years of guiding tourists through the mountains. But the amount mattered less than what it represented. Vindication, justice, the system finally working as it should. "What will you do with it?" Walter asked, accepting the coffee she offered. Morgan looked out the window where the snow continued falling, transforming the familiar landscape into something new yet fundamentally unchanged. "Protect the mountain, set up a conservation trust. Make sure this place stays wild long after I'm gone, just as Samuel and Nathan would have wanted." Walter nodded approval, understanding the weight of her decision, the continuation of a legacy decades in the making. The legal documents contained something else. Notification that Garrett Caldwell had provided additional testimony about his father's operations, revealing crimes even Eleanor hadn't known about. In exchange for his cooperation, his sentence had been reduced further. He would be eligible for parole in 7 years. Morgan felt surprisingly little anger at this news. Garrett had been a product of his father's influence, raised to value acquisition over preservation, dominance over stewardship. But he'd chosen ultimately to break that pattern, to help dismantle what his father had built through decades of corruption. Perhaps there was hope in that, the possibility that patterns could be broken, that the sins of the father need not become the legacy of the son. As Walter prepared to leave, another vehicle appeared on the logging road, Logan's personal truck rather than his patrol SUV. Since his retirement last month, he'd shed some of the formal trappings of office, seemed more relaxed, more like the young man Morgan had known decades ago. He carried a package wrapped in brown paper, tied with simple twine, a housewarming gift. Seems silly after you've been here almost a year, but I wanted to find something right. Inside was a quilt, not new but lovingly preserved. Traditional pattern, the stitching, small and precise, the fabrics faded with age and washing. It was my grandmother's. Logan explained, uncharacteristically hesitant. Made from scraps of family clothing, bits and pieces of lives lived in these mountains. Seemed like it belonged here with someone who understands what this place means. Morgan ran her fingers over the careful stitches, feeling the history embedded in the fabric, the generations of mountain women who had created beauty from necessity, warmth from fragments. It was a different kind of legacy than Samuel's rifle or Nathan's letters, but no less powerful for being domestic rather than wild. It's perfect. She spread it across the bed, where it seemed to belong, as if it had always been there. Thank you. As the three of them shared coffee and Walter's fresh-baked bread, Morgan felt a sense of completion she'd never expected to find. Not family in the traditional sense, but community, connection, belonging. The very things she'd run from 30 years ago, thinking they would constrain her, only to discover they were what gave life meaning. Outside, the snow continued falling, covering Samuel's mountain in pristine white. The saplings she and Lily had planted along the creek bank stood like sentinels, thin and vulnerable now, but holding the promise of future forest. The solar panels gleamed darkly against the snow-covered roof, blending old ways with new technology, honoring the past while embracing the future. This was her legacy now, not just preserving what Samuel and Nathan had protected, but extending it, enhancing it, ensuring it would survive for generations yet unborn. The trust fund would protect the legal rights to the land, but the true protection came from connection, from teaching Lily and others what the mountain meant, why it mattered, how to love something wild without taming it. As Walter and Logan departed, leaving her to the peaceful solitude of a snow day, Morgan felt the presence of those who had gone before. Samuel's gruff wisdom, Nathan's quiet devotion, even her mother's complicated love. They were part of her story, threads in the quilt of her life, inseparable from who she had become. The mountain had taught her its most important lesson. Nothing truly valuable is ever possessed. It is only held in trust for a time, then passed on to those who would cherish it next. Samuel had understood this. Nathan had lived it. Now it was her turn. Outside, a raven called through the falling snow, its harsh voice a reminder that the wild remained, endured, continued. Morgan smiled and answered in her heart, promising stewardship, care, protection for as long as she was able. After that, others would take up the watch. Lily, perhaps, or someone yet unknown, called to the mountain as Morgan herself had been so many years ago. The legacy would continue. The mountain would endure. And in that certainty, Morgan Reed found peace.